The American Theater Wing and the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts bring you the American Theater Wing's Guide to Careers in the Theater. This session, The Orchestrator.
Hello, I'm Ted Chapin with the American Theater Wing, and with me is orchestrator and arranger Luther Henderson. That's sort of half the story. I think that's orchestrator, arranger, pianist, composer, dance arranger, and all that. But let's start by a question which is, I think, asked often and probably it can never be asked often enough, which is, what is the difference between an orchestrator and an arranger?
Well, I'll try to answer that. I don't know if I'm going to be successful.
We may come back to it several times.
Right. But I think the first thing to understand is that we are involved in a creative process, which starts with whoever has the idea, like the composer or the singer or the griot or whoever we want to go in the past time, and is delivered ultimately to the listener or the person or the audience. Now, in that delivery, making that delivery, there are several steps that are involved that, in past many centuries ago, were not. The labor was not subdivided. I mean, I doubt if Verdi had a dance arranger, you know, or vocal arranger. Could be, but I don't think so. Mozart and those, I don't think they had that. No,
they didn't have the people down in the bottom.
No, do I think, you know, Sigmund Romberg or the ones further in this, but here in the United States, where the musical comedy theater has developed, I think there was a unique circumstance wherein these European influences, as coming through the operetta and so forth, were met head-on, collided with the what should I say, folk heritage of the African culture, which was here then. Mm-hmm. And as such, various hybrids developed, both sides of the fence. I mean, we have minstrels on one side, and we have the so forth. So the business of the of delivering this message got divided up because, particularly I think when the advent in the musical comedy theater involved itself more with ballet and story and stuff like that, so that it became obvious that there were going to have to be different other actions. Now, I know I'm going to get back to what you asked me at first. But,
I'll get with you.
But the point is this: that today, and back when I started, back in the 40s and 50s, the influences and the disciplines and conventions and so forth of both cultures were active in each other's realm. And in the theater, I think that what happened was, for instance, whereas Gilbert and Sullivan was a written culture, a written thing, but taken from the other side, it wasn't written from what we found, and it had to be explained, it had to be put down, it had to be formalized. But we wanted all of this to be richness of things.
So that in a way, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the composer of the musical theater that will write music, but certain influences that come from the popular world, the Afro-American world and stuff, as the musical theater became a more complicated, complex creature, it needed these influences.
Well, as the early, what they call black theater, so forth, with the minstrelsy, and we got into the business of U.V. Blake and those people like that. I won't go through that. The point is, there's an arranger. I think the way it started was with a piano player.
Right.
I think that the person who was the rehearsal pianist for, I take No No Nanette because I know that was originally in the 20s, right? Now, I worked on No No Nanette back in, the 60s, someplace.
Early 70s.
70s or something like that. But now in the 20s, No No Nanette was written by Vincent Youmans, and for instance, you have a tune called T for Two, dum, ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. And it is pretty square, it's put down. The person sings it, it's done by a duet and so forth. Now, that's fine for a rehearsal pianist to do this. Even in the case where they might have a person whose key didn't fit, they could very easily train. Trick came when they decided they wanted to have a dance sequence. Then what did they do? Evidently, they just had the pianist just play
it over and over
again.
Right.
Now, we soon got tired of that.
Right.
And
But the musical theater got tired of that
musical theater
in the
got
30s.
tired of it, and the dance arranger was asked to, quote-unquote, extend, elaborate whatever you want to say.
And arrange. That would be arranging.
Right. So he would do so many times with total disregard for whatever's going to come in so far as an orchestrator.
Right.
We have several ones, Trudy Rittman and
Right.
Dorothea Freitag and a lot of those people.
But you said they would do their dance arrangements without thinking about what the orchestrator was going to do?
In a way.
But they would have to think about what the composer did.
Yes, that is true, because one was not allowed, one could not disavow the composer, as we do sometimes in jazz music, for instance, in Pacific, or in any real folk music, where it's
more improvisational and jazz.
And the performance is indeed of essence. I take note of that because it's such fun with Ralph. He was the
Ralph Burns, who was the orchestrator.
Orchestrator. But by that time, I had grown past Richard Rogers, who hired me for this first thing, to insist that when I did my arrangements, I would do also the orchestration, because I thought orchestra. Now, what's the difference? Because as a pianist, one might say, listen, now at this point, I want to have a herd of elephants come in and dance to T for two. And they would say, all right, bum, 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 and maybe they would put in the bass and so forth. Well, maybe we only have a string section. I don't know what we have, but so therefore we have to do something to accommodate that.
And if while you're arranging, you have to think about that.
That's what you should be doing, you see. Or I remember one particular time I was hired as an orchestrator or something. I won't name the piece, but a sketch was given to me to do from a dance arranger, which had so little to do with orchestration than with piano playing and with so forth, that I very mean-spiritedly decided to orchestrate it exactly as I was given it, you see.
Okay, right.
And I was soundly reprimanded for it, I must say.
Well, but what did they think, what did somebody want from you to take something which wasn't good? Did people understand it wasn't good and they wanted you to make it good?
Yes, as a matter of fact, they wanted me to make it playable by
an orchestra. Right, and it wasn't.
No, not really. But the point is that this is the work. This is not just the work of this is the work of an orchestrator.
Well, and clearly you're talking about a multi-level collaboration, because you have the composer, you have the arranger, you have the orchestrator. Right. And also, I don't want to overemphasize the fact that specifically you coming from a black world of a jazz and an improvisational world, you personally brought something to the musical theater that was a little jazzy, and everybody wanted that.
Well, as a matter of fact, I've got to say that I am at this point in my life am involved very much with Duke Ellington and so forth. Then he is the one that is instrumental in starting me with Irving Townsend, who got me with Castellanos.
As an arranger and orchestrator.
And orchestrator, got me with Castellanos and Richard Rogers. And I remember the first Richard Rogers thing. They wanted me, and I had to try to play a little bit like Count Basie, because that's what they wanted.
And this was Flower Drum song?
Right. No, Flower Drum was later.
Oh, this is earlier?
Later. This was later than that, you see. Anyway, the point is this, that yes, that everyone wants to partake of the primal communication. Everyone. We're talking from Wagner on to Boogie Woogie, That's what the name of the game is. Now, what the point is that in the delivering this particular thing, sometimes it takes just a performer. Sometimes the performer just does it, and he plays his guitar or plays his piano and sings. Boom. Now you've got something else in between, so you have to have help. And this is the area in which you come up with arranger, orchestrator, copyist. Don't forget the copyist either.
I won't.
Because the various transpositions, the various things that have to happen, plus to say nothing of the legibility of the music for the things, can make or break the deal.
No,
see.
absolutely. Since you're there, I want to talk about some of the stuff that we have here, because you talked about copyists, and I think part of what the job of both an arranger and an orchestrator is to take what has been created at the piano or whatever and document it in a manner in which it can be played by others and repeated.
That's
right?
a very, very good way to put it. That's exactly right.
So here, for example, a couple of years ago, you were the dance arranger and orchestrator, co-orchestrator of a production of St. Louis Woman at the Encores.
Encores, right.
Right. And that was a recreation because there was an album, but all the original material was lost.
Right.
So that in that instance, here's the cakewalk, for example, and it looks like this is what was first given to you, right?
Yes.
There's sort of sheet music.
Right, yes. And this incidentally, is even, I'm trying to say, yes, I guess it was like the sheet music. It may even have come from...
It's piano vocal, because there's a piano
vocal,
part with one line of vocal.
Right. So this is what we got from the original thing.
Right. So there was the song.
Right.
And you're handed that. Now you have to make an arrangement
I have to make
from
an
it.
arrangement for it.
So then this is... Can you turn the page?
Yes.
My arms aren't long enough. Here's a partial sketch. Now what is that?
That means that I've taken the thing that's given and indicated that, for instance, I have stuck here 4 bars that acts as an introduction and a lead-in to the vocal here.
Right.
They didn't have that on there, but we needed that because the script called for some sort of action to be from here to here.
And you had to make some music.
Had to make this up
before the music started.
And then we got here. We heard this. This is what the thing was. Now what it says, quartet. Is that what it says?
Right, quartet.
All right. So the whole quartet's not written out.
Right. This is partial. This is the beginning.
Yes, but then it goes, and so this is a little sketch that I wrote for what might possibly be a sketch of the orchestration, and so forth. This is what the arranger did.
Now, I have to say, I'm impressed with the fact that this was generated by a computer.
That particular piece, yes.
Do you arrange and orchestrate these days on a computer?
I do. I think I'm somewhat the exception. I think a lot of guys do now, but I think I'm more. How should I say? I stick to it more because I not only generate the sketches, but I generate the score. Now you can understand on a small screen, it depends on the size of the. Now if I have a 10-line score or something like that, 12-line score, that's fine.
Yeah.
But when I've got 27 pieces to do, it's very difficult. So I've now adopted the thing of condensing my orchestration, my scores, into the groups of woodwind, so forth, and simply marking them as I would a complete sketch.
Right.
For which an orchestra would simply have to deal with the things, and thus I can get into maybe a conceivable length of space.
But that's the arranger in you that's putting it into a position so the orchestrator in you can expand it.
Right, and this is why I also find that I have to myself remember that orchestrations are not always playable on a piano.
A very good point. But they're not meant to be playable on a piano.
Well, no, but they have to be. And this is why the advent of the piano conductor part, a condensation of the whole thing, so that one can use it in rehearsal and take the pertinent parts and play it and so forth.
But that you're getting a little ahead of this process, I think.
A little bit, yes.
Because I want to point out here that even though this is a partial sketch, over here in pencil, somebody's written flute, oboe, clarinet, bassoon, trumpets, 1, 2, 3, woodwinds, 1, 2, trombones, 1 and 2.
That's my notation, because my head wanted to know that that's what I was doing this for.
Because that you were told at the beginning of this is what the orchestra is going to be.
That's right. That's right. Then we went on. Now, I could very easily have just done this whole thing and turned it over to somebody like Ralph.
Right, by Ralph Burns, but in this case you didn't. Yeah. Is that all that's in that book? Do we then go to here?
I think there's a score. I don't know if there's any score in here.
Well, I'm fascinated.
No, the score is not in here.
Okay.
We do have a score someplace, I believe.
Yes, but we're getting now. Here's another partial sketch of that same song, "The Cakewalk." I love the fact that there's a post-it on it that says "discard." We may get to why that's there. But now this is, let me put this back so we don't spread paper all over the place. They don't like that in the booth. There we go. Let's put it there. So this is now expanded. This says partial sketch.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know why? Because I never took this notation off.
Right, okay. That's forget the partial. I see.
Yeah, but then I think this has got indicated something. I can't see exactly.
Well, it says stage up here, then it says sketch, which they must have taken from here.
Yes.
Now it says orchestra.
Yes.
And then it says piano rehearsal. That's what you're talking about.
This is now
another step
another
up.
sketch, another step up, right.
So this is adding more with some orchestration. There's now an orchestration line in here.
I'm not sure that all orchestrators go to this particular length that I do, but
it's good because it's a process and you can see how it grows, because then it goes to this, which is a full score.
That is the full score, right.
Right. And that's where you have the clarinets and the flutes and oboe, everything's there.
Right.
Now, is this generated on computer? This sort of looks like handwriting.
This is handwriting. The reason, my associate, Leonard Oxley, is the one who did this. I have given him my complete sketch.
Is that what you give him?
I've given him my complete sketch, and I've indicated in that complete sketch, for instance, that these are woodwinds, and this is how I want them to be divided.
Right.
And he then, in his knowledge, is able to put all those on his proper keys and so forth.
But in order to do that for you, he has to be an orchestrator himself.
Yes, but he has to be the kind of an orchestrator who's willing to subjugate himself to another orchestrator.
He's got to think like you. He's got to think like Luther Henderson.
Yes, I hope he's listening to this because he's wonderful. But I don't expect that there are many Leonards around, because most of us don't like to do other people's things.
No, but it's a good collaboration, and the musical theater is nothing but collaboration.
Yes,
but what you're saying is you wouldn't give that level. You wouldn't give it to him at this point. You've got to do that.
I might give this to Ralph.
Right, Ralph Burns, who is a.
But incidentally, I wouldn't give this. Back then, if I'd known what I know now, I would not give this to Robert Russell either.
Okay, well, I want to talk about Robert Russell Bennett in a moment, but just because you had mentioned copyists. Now, a copyist in a handwritten score like this, a copyist has to go through and create a clarinet
single parts for each one of those things. And now I don't have any. We generate parts by computer also. It's still not universal because for several reasons. I won't go into it, but the point is that sometimes it is faster when you're under great duress and you have to, deliver something, gives you a score in the morning, you have to put it on the stand at night. You have to divide it up some way with people. And unless you have everybody on finale or whatever your thing is and so forth, that you then have to get some to do it. But it doesn't really matter because there are, the business of hand copying is not out of order yet.
Right.
We're still doing it. We've got some fine people and so forth that do this and who are invaluable.
Right. And
particularly they're invaluable because when the orchestrator makes a mistake, not me,
right,
you understand?
Right, those other guys.
But they say, oh, this seems to be a little bit out of range for the clarinet. Is this something that
Yeah.
That's sort of
well, that's also a point about orchestrator, is that an orchestrator has got to know what the range of every one of these instruments is, so that you're not going to write a flute part that goes where a flute can't play. But just to clarify before we go on, what a copyist would actually do with a score like this, which is, 20 pages, 30 pages long, 274 bars, is one copyist could take this part and take the first line off every single bar and line it up.
Right.
And if a human person is doing it, they can figure out where there may be some breaks, so they can have do a page turn and stuff. But I wanted to ask you, it's not much on this one, but here's a computer-generated score. And this is the beginning where there are not a lot of people, but here later on there are a lot of people playing. Can you, if this is in a computer these days, can you push a button and say flute and have them spit out a flute part?
I can't, but my associate, Dwayne Grant, can do that.
But I assume if a computer does that, it's only going to do it in a regulated fashion. So if there's one note that's held over 6 bars, you're going to have the same size bars, and you're not going to be page
Not
turners?
really. You'd be surprised how sophisticated these machines are these days. You can, I can't tell you exactly how it's done,
But it can be done.
but it can be done.
But the point that you were making, that if you'd have to do a score in the morning and it's got to be on the stand that night, and it's not done computer, it's done the old-fashioned way, you may have to have 6 people, one of whom is doing these 3, one of whom is doing those 3, and they're working at the same time.
Oh, no, not so I don't misrepresent. Dwayne would dispute me because he thinks he's pretty fast and he's got his crew. He thinks they can put them out pretty fast, and they can.
In a day on a computer,
Right.
he thinks.
Yeah. And he certainly can. But the point is that the business that we are in, and the business, computer business, should be understood that it is not primarily for swiftness, but for, what's the word? We have a record. We have, it's complete. I can go back, which recently, for instance, we were supposed to do Jelly's Last Jam on HBO. It never was coming with Seinfeld, but now I had most of that on computer.
Right, and it wasn't dog-eared and it wasn't
No,
yellowed
and I
and
just
wrong.
I bring it up on my screen, and I can tell what this is. And believe me, it was worth all the time.
Okay, but I want to ask you something though. When a score like this is presented and it's copied and everybody plays it, one of the problems is there can be wrong notes. But what if the dance arranger says, "Oh, you know, I want 6 more bars in there." So this score that they've started with, you have to add more scores. Changes happen all the time.
Which we have a phrase that we like to use
I think I want to hear.
just before it comes out of the rehearsal. Say, "This is now frozen."
It's like bird's eye. It's frozen.
Frozen until after the first rehearsal.
Oh, good. The first performance.
First performance.
Right.
Now, if that is not so, this we must relate this to the producer, because it could very easily happen that there would be a necessary change,
Right.
and that then represents a sizable chunk that the producer has to come up with that he might not have been.
In terms of money to make the change.
Yes, I can think of one example, which is in a show called Jelly's Last Jam. Now, we had, in California, when we did the workshop, we didn't have Gregory Hines, who was this tap master, wonderful. But we had a person who was a dancer, so over opportunity, wonderful. The point is that when we got to New York, having this star, we had to do something about this particular number, which was just before the end of the first act, where Jelly Roll was showing off, and he had to show what he did. And also, he couldn't do it by just imitating the piano. He is a tap dancer par excellence.
And why not use him if you have him?
Not why not. That's how come we hired him, because he was this thing. So therefore, this score and everything that we had perfectly from California had to be
Taken apart and put back together
taken
again.
apart and put back together.
And if I may point out, because of all the variations, you start to do that, and it has an effect on every single
one.
person.
So therefore, now this we didn't have. Well, yes, we did, because the first production was not quite as elaborate in terms of music.
Right.
Smaller
band.
Smaller band and so forth. So that's sort of like an aggrandized sketch in a way of speaking.
Right.
So it wasn't that big of a problem. But the truth is, yes, that problem is we try to iron all that stuff out before we come to the rehearsal, which brings up another point in terms of orchestration, which is maybe tangential. We have developed people today whom we call music directors, supervisors, like Paul Gemignani, for instance.
Musical supervisor.
So forth, who start with the show at the beginning and are there to talk about at rehearsal every day,
Right.
and who are in charge of directing all of this stuff, so that there's their responsibility to the producer to see to it that we don't run into any train wrecks way down there, right just before the people are supposed to come and see it. See,
Didn't that used to be the musical director?
It is still, but the musical director. I started with a musical director named Max Meth. I don't know how many people remember this guy.
I remember the name.
Max Meth. Well, he was before Lehman Engel. He was. But the point is that yes, Max started with, and so did Lehman. Started with the beginning and so forth. But today, it's even more so because they are involved before it even gets into rehearsal. Do you see? They're not. They're involved.
But are they involved in, for example, how big the orchestra is and what theater it would go into? And,
yes,
and
I would say so,
and
definitely.
Who the orchestrator might be?
Definitely.
Do you think this is a good thing?
Yes, in this respect, that at least we have one person who has a mind as to how it shall be. It's like having a general.
Right, in the music department.
Yes, and without a general, the army doesn't get very far.
Right.
Right. No, that's right. Well, I just thought about it, but now this again, yes. So far, it does have to do with not only with all of the areas: arranger, orchestrator, copyist, it's a rehearsal pianist. All these things have to be coordinated, and they are done so. What's his name over at the Encores? He does a fantastic job.
Rob Fisher.
Rob Fisher does a fantastic job as well.
Now, obviously, the role of the musical supervisor is to coordinate all the musical forces, which means a focused collaboration. What happens if the dance arranger has a very different point of view than the vocal arranger? Is he the one who has to try to sort that out?
It's not good. It's not good. I think that who has to sort it out, each of them must be responsible, must be overseen, let's say, by someone, whether it be the composer or the musical supervisor. But this seldom happens. Now you come into the business of the choreographer.
Right, a dance arranger, another one of your tasks.
In the past, how should I think? Stravinsky didn't ask the dance person about what his music should be.
Right.
If he was going to do, the Rites of Spring or whatever.
He wrote it.
He wrote it, and the choreographer came in and did his thing.
Danced to that music.
Now, this also is about the disciplines coming from the roots, from the folk music standpoint. Now this person, the performer in the name of the dance, says he is the one that has to deliver this stuff, and he started in from the beginning, and he has an idea. So you come to when the dance is originated, Rogers, what was it, Oklahoma? Which one of the? Anyway, somebody.
Somebody other than the composer?
Other than the composer. Start where I just started. Where did I leave off now?
You were talking about choreographers. And
right.
When
now the choreographer then has some say, and to the point that he is now considered part
of the composers, sort of. The dancer, or the
the dancer.
The
now,
creation.
I was fortunate. My first choreographer that was a lady named Carol Haney.
Right.
Happened to be very, very musical.
Was this Flower Drum Song?
It was Flower Drum Song.
I was going to ask you, because Richard Rodgers, we're told, is a composer who had fairly clear ideas about what his music should sound like.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And you had Carol Haney.
And Richard Rodgers. And I must say, one of the biggest compliments I think I've ever had in my career is having Richard Rodgers say to me, "Why don't you do what you want to do?"
Do what you want to do.
Do what you want to do.
That's trust, and that's important. That's really important.
But not just trust. Think about this person now. This is a person who dots every I and crosses every T. But he wants you to sing and play it exactly like that.
Right.
That's what it is.
But it's interesting because he was doing Flower Drum Song, which was in the 50s, a pretty hep show, so he knew he may not have been quite as hep as you.
Right. And anyway, they won't go into that, but the point is that Carol and Gene Kelly was also on. He was another, the dance point of view came into the actual musical composition.
Now, did you just, a logistical thing, as a dance arranger in that instance, did you sit in on the dance rehearsals and play piano as they were going along?
Yeah,
They wanted?
Both. And again, what I found that I would have to do would be, that was the beginning of my arranging my mind to write something orchestral that could also be demonstrated on the piano.
Which is sort of partly what you were talking about, the piano conductor score, a reduction of the orchestra.
And I think I've developed that to a point that's what I do. I don't think, and so that again is my friend Leonard.
But that's
understands my
my
ways, and so he can sit in the rehearsal and do stuff.
Yeah.
And I can be home.
But because he does stuff because you give him the piano reduction.
Right.
Because I know that in Ain't Misbehavin', you were the orchestra for the first half of the evening.
That was a whole different thing. Now,
yeah, but you were at the piano, and the whole orchestra was in your fingers.
Right. Well, that was a different. Listen to the approach. Here we're coming. This is interesting, because here we're coming directly from the Afro side, not from the Euro side, as from but directly from the Afro side into the European scene.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as such, we have a strong thing. We have a person out by the name of Fats Waller, and his music is global.
Right.
And we're asked to use his talking, his things and so forth, which I'm going to form a revusical of a sort. Now, in order to do that, we had to write. Now, I was originally hired to write the piano music for another piano player to play. And this pianist, I don't know whether he had the grace or the bad fortune to have slipped in the subway about a week or so before the thing and broke his leg.
Not good for a pianist.
Whatever. But the question came up, who is going to play this piano? And of course, I turned and looked around with everybody else, and I said, I don't know who's going to play this piano. But so, as it turned out, I had to play the piano. Very good for me. Because, I had to remember, that's what I am. I'm a piano player. I better go to my woodshed and try to learn some of this stuff. But the thing is that then, subsequently, adding more pieces, we didn't add a band. We added what Fats Waller's rhythm was. We added a couple of pieces for production.
Right.
And I think, if I say something, it was because of Richard and Murray and Arthur, of these, that this whole thing gelled into something that probably looked like a review, but didn't act like one.
Right, no, it was wonderful.
And I don't know how it happened. Don't ask me.
But
we just did it. But that's just what I mean. The reason is it came from the thrust of Africa.
Right. On that show, you were the arranger and the orchestrator, correctly?
Yes.
So let's just summarize if we can.
And piano player.
And orchestra.
General practitioner.
Right. If we can summarize then, how would you summarize what an arranger does and what an orchestrator does, now that we've talked about it?
All right. General summary is that the arranger and the orchestrator implement the creative process from the composer or singer or whoever starts it up to the point of delivery to the audience.
But working backwards, then the orchestrator decides how the instruments play.
He is the court of last resort before we get to the stage.
And then the arranger has done.
Will have done the sketches, if you will, the parts that people rehearse by. He will have done all the things that we've done. And so it is, sometimes, most of the time, you have two arrangers, vocal arranger and dance arranger. Right. But again, I usually put the same things together.
Right.
But for instance, when I had Buster Davis. Now, Buster Davis and I might have been were practically of one mind. It was a wonderful combination because that we didn't have to. We weren't working against each other. We all had the same thing going, you know.
Well, that's interesting because you've worked with a lot of wonderful co-arrangers, co-orchestrators, and stuff.
Believe me, man, it's really
It's quite
I'm
a
not
list.
trying to low grade myself, but I don't. It's a happenstance that I don't think anyone can parallel, and it is a happenstance. The fact that I may have had a modicum of talent to go on, that's one thing. That's wonderful.
For us, it's
look,
wonderful.
wonderful. But look who I got thrown into, you know, with Rogers and all these people that you go, fantastic. To start
there.
but it starts with Ellington.
Ellington.
Starts with Ellington.
Was that your first job?
Yeah, absolutely.
And how did you get that job?
Well, I think I got the job mainly because I graduated from Juilliard in 1942.
Okay, now wait a minute. That doesn't sound like the guy from the popular world coming into Broadway having a Juilliard degree.
Well, you see, at that time, how will I explain this? I come from a family of educators.
Okay.
And who were more or less liberal and so forth. We were friends. They were friends with the great historians and so forth, as well as U.B. Blake was like a family friend. You see.
So the idea of the combination of U.B. Blake and education.
Now, how did it happen to be the Juilliard? Because in an educator's family, not to have a college degree, you know you're going to be sent directly to purgatory. And it is not discussed. It is not discussed. You will go to college and so. But now, by the time I got to high school, I'd already heard with Ellington and so when I heard Gershwin reporting best, and I'm jamming with these people down and saying, I did not wish to go to college, but I had to. And
so Juilliard was the compromise.
Juilliard came up, and I had to do everything to get in. And I took music educators course. Well, it turns out to be the greatest thing I did. But the point is that that's how it happened. So when I got out, I haven't been running around with Mercer and all that group and all that. Ellington used to call me his classical arm. What I know, I had a couple of courses
because of Juilliard. But do you feel that anybody interested in arranging or orchestrating for Broadway should have the kind of training that Juilliard provides?
Excuse me.
That's all right. It's a big question.
Absolutely. Reason. And it is, if one wishes to participate in the arts, in any specific part of the arts, one can only have one dimension if one does not study all of the dimensions that are involved. That doesn't mean that you have to be a concert pianist in order to play boogie-woogie,
right,
or vice versa. But it does mean you must know something about it. And the way to do for an arranger, an orchestrator, it is invaluable. You have people on Broadway now, you know, Johnny Tunick and all these other guys who are very classically trained and whose training, and Peter Matz, for instance, and all these guys, what we have to say, the vocabulary with which we must work, is not strictly one thing or the other.
So you
must learn all of it. When I say to a degree, the business of having a classical education, quote unquote,
right, is important.
And now today, the business of having what I would call a jazzical education as well is also becoming apparent, as we see with all the schools, Juilliard included,
right,
and all the symphony societies. You know, Winton is doing a great job up there with things. Now, it doesn't mean you don't even have to agree with all the stuff that what they put out. That's beside the point.
Right.
The point is that the effort is being made to not homogenize, but to eradicate the polarization that seems to exist between these two things, this classical and the jazz, or the European and the African. It's all one thing. As you want to come right down to it, it all comes from the same place.
It's all music.
It's all from the same place. It's all a matter of communication. It all has to do with one's sharing, one's spirituality. This communication, this flow, is as essential to the life of the human family as is the blood is to the life of each one of us. And this is why it's so important. This is why music is so important, that because it is a vocabulary that's immediately understandable, number one. Number two, it's something that everybody knows. And number two, it's a spiritual expression which is more articulate than any other, I think, between each of us. And when that flow is disrupted for whatever reason, we have what I call a lack of ease. We have a dis-ease. It's a disease.
Dis-ease.
A disease of mankind. Great symptom of which we saw on September the 11th.
I mean,
okay, I won't get into that
no,
now.
But I mean, that's so beautifully phrased. And the only thing I want to ask is, in addition to kind of keeping your eyes and ears open to all music, which is what you're saying in terms of training for an orchestrator and an arranger, do you feel that there's a similar kind of openness to all studies and all reading?
Absolutely, absolutely, no question about it. And I'm not going to get into this too much, but I'm just as guilty almost as anyone. And particularly, I will say September 11 because it's opened everybody's eyes up to various things, mine included.
Right.
That we must find some way of reestablishing this particular flow. We have the spiritual blood has stopped flowing that way.
Right.
And we are sick.
Yeah, we got to know. I think I like your saying ease, dis-ease. I've never heard it done that way. I wanted to ask you, we hear about the problems of Broadway, and Broadway is so expensive, and musicals cost millions and millions of dollars. Is there a career to be made as an orchestrator or arranger on Broadway, or can it only be a tangential to another career?
Both. But I think it depends on the persuasion and the energy and the thing of the particular person involved. The one thing I think is important, whether you're an orchestrator or not, is that you must know that you're coming into a very fickle business, that is not based in the kind of reality that most people is. So that therefore, if indeed you're coming in with anything less than a burning desire, burning passion for the music, you're best advised to stay out or just do it partially.
I think that goes for all theater.
Yes. Now, that is not to say that fortunes are not made here.
Right.
Nor it is not to say that, I feel very fortunate. I never had another job since I was in the Navy in 1947, 42, whatever it was.
Yeah.
And that's whether I'm successful or not, to be able to do that is fantastic.
But you've been an orchestrator and arranger for more than the theater. As I said to you earlier, the first time I ever saw your name was on I Got a Right to Sing the Blues, Eileen Farrell's first pop album.
Yes.
And those are great. Those are great albums.
I love it.
Now I wanted to ask you. We talked earlier about in a show where you have the composer and you have the other musical staff people, but in a case where you're doing arrangements and orchestrations for someone like Eileen Farrell, how much do you listen to the performer? And how much do you say to the performer, I've heard you sing and this is what you're going to do?
Well, it depends upon the performer. Many performers are I have to say this, how will I say it? I'm not out demeaning others, are more creative, let's put it this way, are more improvisational than others. And Eileen is the rare person who, though not completely improvisational, has that sense. Do you understand? She has, and she also is unusual in that she has an extraordinary instrument.
Right.
Now, to what extent? For instance, on that particular album,
Right.
I heard her say, and she said she wanted to sing the blues. I will say this, that a song that we never got on because she wanted to do a blues version of the Marine hymn. And
Right. Okay.
that wasn't too good an idea.
No, but it was an idea.
But I thought, here's this lady, and she loves to sing these notes. So I thought, listen, I'm going to use that thing. So I would have her do a vocalese at the top of the thing, oh, like I would hear sometime a trumpet player do. I would say, look, this lady can do that, look at her, so forth. And so I would say, why don't do this, try this. And she would say, oh, yes, let's see about that. Or if, when it comes down to the actual thing, I might involve certain figures here and say, why don't you try this? So far as the actual overflow, the actual intent, the actual contour of the thing, that's I lead. That's
Right.
what her.
But you sat down with her on a piano and went through
yeah.
everything, so that by the time you the time you got to scores for an orchestra, she knew what you were doing and you knew what she was doing and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And I believe it was my father who hired you for that job. But I wanted to ask you, in a Broadway situation, who is it who's responsible for hiring the orchestrator?
Producer, I'd say.
And the composer, if he's alive, does he have a say? I mean,
Oh, yes.
I
think the composer definitely has a say. I don't think. Let me try to think. I think that there may be times when an orchestra may be suggested to a composer. I'm trying to think.
Are there any times when one orchestrator will ask you to come and share the load? Because I do notice that
yes.
it's one job that occasionally there will be two names.
Oh, yes, there will be two names, and most of the time, because of the exigencies of time, for instance, on a play called Do Re Mi, we during the weeks, 4 or 5 or 6 weeks, whatever, while we were in rehearsal, I was the principal orchestrator on that. And I was required to produce some 800 pages of score before we got out of town. Well, I didn't know it then, but that was ridiculous.
Right. So
and I found out the hard way, but that's all right.
But did you ask some people helped you with
Absolutely. I had to hire people to do that, who would do things.
The way you talked earlier, it was still your voice, but other people did that.
Absolutely, and it's always that way. Excuse me. We do continue to have a collaboration with composers, and it's been pointed out. I saw in some production recently where in some opera, whether it was by Mozart or by Chopin, that there was a section that might have been done by somebody else whose name was in 8 bars, a tick bar, or something. So it's not new, But we need help.
Yeah,
we need help.
And you help each other. Absolutely. One of the things that's good is you do help each other.
Now, recently, depending on the degree of it, we try to at least list the orchestrators that are people that are involved.
But I have an orchestrator, arranger, composer question. You talked about Do Re Mi, and you were the principal orchestrator. Mm-hmm. Do Re Mi has one of the best overtures of the musical theater. Did you arrange that?
I did, but I want to tell you that's a very interesting question. That was not the first overture. That was about the 4th overture that was done. And during the course of that time, I was led by a man by the name of Julie Stein.
The composer.
It's no disrespect to Julie, but we fondly and lovingly know him as the madman of Broadway.
He was.
Yes, and I had no better sense at that time than to follow every direction that he said.
I see.
Which got me in a lot of trouble.
So you listened to him. So the first 3 were him?
Well, not only that, and so was the last one.
Right.
What we got from Julie Stein was his thing about having to be so. It wasn't going to do the same thing. We had to have a show curtain It was about jukeboxes.
Right,
You know?
so he wanted all the jukeboxes.
Real jukeboxes. Now, we're
So basically,
operating jukeboxes, and wanted to coordinate it with the pit.
so every song that was heard in the overture was on the jukebox or something like that?
Something like that.
It was a concept, is what it was.
It was a concept.
But he
made you stretch, you know.
Yeah.
You have to try it. So this point is that overture, I understood what he wanted because I really did.
Yeah.
They were on the verge of calling somebody in to help me do this overture. And I won't name names, but whoever they called in said, well, not if it says, I'll come in, but you have to pay me $100 a page, and you have to ask Luther to ask me.
Right.
So I had a lot of support from that, you know what I mean?
That's good. From your fellow orchestrators.
From my fellow orchestrators.
Now, I want to go back to the beginning. How did you get your first job on Broadway, and if I were to say to you, I'm a young orchestrator and I want to work on Broadway, how do I get a job on Broadway?
That's a good question. Not like I did. But the fact is...
How did you do it?
Well, I did it by having the happenstance to be in Ellingtonia.
Right, but happenstance can work.
Yes, happenstance can work. This is what you should be. What you need to do, number one, is prepare yourself for that point. I would say that getting to be an orchestrator at this time, what would I do? I don't know. I guess I would just align myself with the various off-Broadway companies, other companies, and so forth. I guess I would inquire every time I saw an orchestra if somebody needed some help.
Do orchestrators come out of orchestras, players? Is that one way, or conductors?
Sometimes, yes, they do. Yes.
But not normally.
Yes, they do. I think that it's a good idea if a person is a player. Now, I wasn't a player that was bent towards being a player in an orchestra, but I think that that if you are and you can play in an orchestra, I think that's very important.
Do you, by the way, orchestrate for any specific players when you orchestrate for a show? Do you have... Sometimes.
Well, for instance, if I know, I'll go back to Jelly's Last Jam.
Right.
And there's a fellow named Jerome Richardson, recently, who plays an extraordinary, play on, is what I'm saying. Plays an extraordinary soprano saxophone.
Right.
And I knew that this is what I wanted. So I asked my contractor to see if he can get Jerome.
Right.
That does not mean that there aren't other saxophone players who can do a wonderful job about that.
Right, but if you hear him...
But I knew Jerome, and now what Jerome did said it. Now Jerome didn't play all of it. We had other people come in.
Right, but in
and they said, sometimes... Julie did it. He used to... what's the trumpet player's name? Dick...
I don't know,
but that trumpet player had to be in every show.
Okay. Well, he always had those high trumpets wailing out the melodies in Julie Stein shows.
Same thing with there was a lady who was a singer, soprano. Every show, Buster did. She had to be in the chorus.
Right.
Do something. You know.
So
you do write for special people,
right.
Special things. Not like in jazz, but just in a way that you do have to have certain people, and you know what they do.
Do you also keep listening to other kinds of music, pop music and stuff?
Yes.
And do you keep learning from them?
I keep learning. Sometimes I realize that I've fallen behind, that I am, how should I say, that I'm not really listening to certain things.
Right.
At least lately, I have to say, you know, that my thrust has been towards the symphonic since in the year 2000. I was fortunate enough to have, actually did it in 1999, to have been commissioned to do a Duke Ellington concert for Sir Simon Rattle, which was done at Carnegie Hall. Now,
so you went, instead of from pop music, you went to the symphony world, and you had fun being in the symphony world.
I think that's, and I keep, today I think about the whole idea of coming out of school in 1942. Ellington said, you know, this is my symphonic and my classical art. He sent me to Richard Rodgers, he sent me to Castellanos and all this sort of stuff. And here I come back around, I'm still there, and I'm doing his stuff with Sir
Simon Rattle. I think that's a great place for us to stop. I thank you very much.
All right.
I've been talking with orchestrator and arranger Luther Henderson. For the American Theater Wing, I'm Ted Chapin.
The American Theater Wing's Guide to Careers in the Theater is a project of the American Theater Wing and the New York Public Library's Billy Rose Theater Collection, Theater on Film and Tape Archive.